Recently, I went to the funeral of a person that had taken their own life. They'd committed suicide, however you prefer to say that. And it was tragic because at this funeral, nobody would talk about the reason why this person had died. They talked about how great they were. They talked about the great things that they'd done, but nobody mentioned the fact that he'd taken his own life. And I kind of feel like it was a missed opportunity because I understand why we don't want to talk about it. As a society, suicide has seemed like this really weird kind of taboo. Can't talk about it. Maybe we'll make it worse. Maybe we'll put ideas in people's heads. Well, the fact of the matter is that suicidal thoughts come whether we want them to or not, and whether people put them in someone's head or whether they find them all on their own. And this is a really important distinction because when we don't talk about suicide, when we're ashamed of talking about suicide, people fall through the cracks. People don't understand the implications that their suicide is going to have on the people that they leave behind. That's what I want to talk about today. And I want to talk about why talking about suicide doesn't make things worse. Welcome to Shattered the Podcast. STP is the story of my journey from the depths of mental illness to a place where I could live again. So you're at a funeral. Everybody's really sad. Everybody's devastated. There's a grief that is more than palpable. And there's an elephant in the room. The person that you're there to commemorate didn't die by natural causes. They killed themselves. There is a special kind of grief at that kind of funeral. When somebody dies suddenly through an accident or disease, it's a one kind of funeral. When somebody's old and they've been ill, it's another kind of funeral. But a funeral where the person that you're there to commemorate has taken their own life is a difficult and hard kind of funeral to sit through because there's this grief. And I was at one recently, about a month ago, and the person that we were commemorating had taken their own life. And the people there were struggling to celebrate the person's life because the person had decided to end it. And it seemed like all of the things that they were celebrating weren't enough to keep this guy alive. And the thing was that they didn't talk about the suicide. They talked about suddenness of the death. They talked about the unexpectedness. They didn't talk about the fact that this person, I'm mixing up the genders because I don't want people to know who it is. This person chose to end everything. Now, I understand why it's difficult. Everybody there was feeling guilty that they didn't know that that person was suffering as much as they were. They felt guilty that they weren't able to see that pain. They felt guilty that they weren't able to offer words to make them realize how much they were loved. And that's the other thing about being at a suicide funeral. There's hundreds and hundreds of people there who would have done anything to not be in that room at that time. And yet the person that took their own life had no idea that 300-400 people were going to show up at their funeral grieving their loss. It would never have crossed their mind that any one person would be there, let alone 400. Suicide is a act that resonates. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. Now, for the person that's thinking about attempting to take their own life. They feel like they are in a vacuum. They feel like they're alone. They feel like no one cares. But it's just a feeling. And because we don't talk about suicide, because we're so ashamed to talk about it, that person who might have had a conversation, might have just called a helpline, might have reached out to a friend and said, mate, I am struggling to the point where I want to take my own life. What would you do? You would pull out all the stops. You would make mistakes. You would rush to help. You would rush in without thinking. You would do anything and everything to keep that person around. And yet, for the person that's contemplating suicide, they don't know any of this. Talked about it before about how whenever a celebrity dies and they've killed themselves, and it's always they died suddenly, there was no suspicious circumstances. And it makes people wonder, well, they had a perfect life with no problems. Why would they kill themselves? I have a real life. I have lots of problems. Maybe it's an option for me. Instead of us saying, okay, what was going on in this person's life? Like when Chris Cornell took his own life, there was a lot of this ambiguous discussion, but there was also a discussion about his struggles and the things that he was finding hard, and the fact that his life wasn't as perfect as it looked like in the tabloids. Why can't we have that honest discussion around suicide? And that's why I'm doing this podcast today, because I want people that are thinking about taking their own life to know that it's a subject that's not taboo. My daughters, one of them who made an attempt, didn't tell anybody, didn't think it was appropriate, didn't think it was possible to just come out and say, Dad, I think I need to kill myself. Now we talk about it all the time. How are you feeling? How, are you thinking about hurting yourself? We make jokes about suicide, not to be funny or flippant, but to bring it into our normal conversation. So maybe his brother, his sister, his aunt, his nephew, her niece, her cousin will hear this conversation and go, okay, they're not scared of talking about suicide. Maybe it's something that I can speak about as well. I've worked in broadcasting. And when they talk about suicide and broadcasting, the old adage was don't ever speak about it because you'll put ideas in people's heads. We've now learned that ambiguousness doesn't help anyone. And if we talk about suicide as being a suicide, this person killed themselves. If somebody is struggling that you know, and you go, oh, I don't want to say you're thinking about hurting yourself because maybe they've never thought about it before. Well, that's wrong, because they probably have thought about it and it had nothing to do with what you've said or done. We asked a classroom full of kids today, would you ask somebody point blank that you were really concerned about if they were going to hurt themselves? And the kids went, no, of course we wouldn't. And they saw both of our faces, the two instructors, and they kind of went, well, maybe we would if we knew them well. We don't understand the impact that we have on the people around us. We can never know. There are people in your life that respect what you have to say and would listen to you. People that you would never dream of. At what point would you be willing, you know somebody was about to die, at what point would you just say nothing? At what point would you decide they're close enough to death for me to talk about it? There was a woman who came to me once. She was in palliative care. She was about to die. And she said, Mark, you never have time for me and it really hurts me. And I didn't understand why, with everything that she had to worry about, she was concerned about how I perceived her. Now, it was a monumental miscommunication. I knew her very, very well, but I treated her like she was on eggshells. As soon as she talked about this, I just said, "Look, I try and be funny. I try and say funny things, and I really don't want to hurt you." And she said, "No, no, I would rather people laugh about the situation because that would be a healthier way for them to deal with it." I feel the same way about suicide. If people just thought that it was okay to say to somebody, "Mate, are you thinking about hurting yourself?" Like, I am not shy now. If I'm with one of my family members and they seem to be struggling, it's one of the questions I asked. I always ask, how sad are you? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? We need to increase and have more conversations around suicide. We need to stop being afraid of the word. Uh, there's an expression that I use in classes. I would rather lose a friendship than lose a friend. So, whatever I think about my friendship with this person, even if I think of the worst consequences, they're going to hate me for asking it. I would rather lose that friendship than lose the person. That's how I feel about it. And I hope that's how other people would feel about it as well. If you notice, you can still vote for me for the Local Hero Award. You don't have to be in Canberra to do that. You can be anywhere. I appreciate all the people that have voted for us already. Just to remind you, I'm up for a Local Hero Award. If I win, the organisation that I work for gets $20,000. I get nothing, and I'm okay with that, honestly. In fact, if the money was coming to me, I would be a lot less blatant in asking people to vote for me. But our organisation would get $20,000, MEACT, Mental Illness Education ACT. I will put the link in the comments and stuff. I do hope that you'll check them out. And I hope that you'll vote for us because 5 times this week, I'm going into schools and I'm talking about mental illness and suicide prevention and stigma and all that sort of stuff. And if we got the $20,000, we can easily increase the amount of kids that we can speak to by thousands. So please vote. Have a great week. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for joining us on Shattered the Podcast. I'm Mark. Special thanks to my producer, Meredith Brosnan, and also to Torian, Kevin, and Lorraine. And we can't forget the amazing band Adelaide, who let us use their song as our theme. For more information, check us out on all your socials, STP Shattered the Podcast.